Greetings everyone. They say there's nothing new in this world, but today I get to prove everyone wrong about that as I test my first ever f1.25 camera lens, the TTArtisan 90mm f1.25. It's a full-frame, manual focus portrait lens, currently for Leica M and Sony E mount cameras, although with the right adapter you could get it onto other mirrorless cameras too. It's $500 in the US, or about £500 here in the UK. If the lens turns out to be any good, then that could be a pretty good deal. I'd like to thank TTArtisan for sending one over to me for testing, although as usual, this is a totally independent review. A lens like this is absolutely brilliant for portrait work or any other subject photography, particularly on a full-frame camera, and that maximum aperture is so bright, giving you a small edge over f1.4 optics, although realistically f1.25 will only be about 25% brighter than f1.4. Still, every little helps, and this lens's out-of-focus backgrounds are pretty dramatic indeed. You'll have to practice your manual focusing here though, and that will slow you down somewhat. The lens itself is big, unsurprisingly, and heavy, weighing just over a kilogram or over 2 pounds. It's metallic, rock solid, a little front heavy, and what's more, I think its aesthetic design is gorgeous, and if that doesn't impress you, just looking through that hypnotically gigantic front glass element will. The lens is not weather sealed, as you can see. Its main control point is a metallic focus ring. The edges of its grooves feel slightly rough on your fingers, but the ring does turn incredibly smoothly. I wish it turned a bit further than just 160 degrees, but thankfully, because of the smoothness, you can still focus it quite precisely. As you can see here, the lens displays some focus breathing, zooming in rather as you focus more closely. The aperture ring is also made of metal. It clicks nice and softly at every half and f-stop, and the stops are evenly spaced out, which is good to see. The lens comes with a rather confusing lens cap and hood combination. It's a screw-on lens cap, something I personally hate, but it will only screw on to the back of the metallic lens hood, which then has to be reverse mounted onto the lens. I've never seen anything like that before. Basically, I would personally just buy a 77mm lens cap separately to go on this thing. As I mentioned, this is a totally manual lens, no autofocus, no camera controlled aperture, no in-lens image stabilization. If you're happy with that though, you'll be pretty delighted with the build quality of this thing. It is as handsome as it is rock solid. Anyway, on to image quality. Let's start by testing it out on a full frame camera, my 42MP Sony A7R III. No in-camera corrections are available with this lens. At f1.25, we actually see very good detail in the middle, but it's rather masked over by low contrast and ghosting on contrasting edges. For instance, if you look over at me playing the violin here, then you can still see good resolution. Anyway, let's have a look over in the corners. I'm pleased to say that sharpness is almost as good in the corners, but interestingly, contrast is noticeably better. Yes, I assure you the lens was focused correctly and to the middle of the frame here. Anyway, let's top down just a little bit to f1.4. The corners look about the same here, perhaps just a little brighter. However, back in the middle, there's a major improvement in contrast. Stop down to f2, and that contrast is joined by excellent sharpness. Over in the corners, at f2, we're seeing a nice improvement as well, some very nice sharpness again here. Stop down to f2.8 or f4 for minuscule little improvements that lead to brilliant image quality across the whole image frame. Stop down to f16, and the lens gets a little softer from the effects of diffraction. Overall, for such a bright aperture lens that only costs £500, the full frame image quality is really quite reasonable. We get usable sharpness at the widest aperture and decently sharp corners, and image quality quickly improves as you stop down the lens. That's about all you can ask for at this price point, really. Okay, let's see about its performance on an APS-C camera now, my little 24MP Sony A5100. At f1.25, we continue to see good resolution in the middle of the image, albeit with that low contrast. The image corners look softer than they did on full frame though, not uncommon though, as an APS-C sized sensor is more demanding. At f1.4, the corners are about the same, but the middle of the image sees just a little more sharpness and contrast. At f2, the middle looks excellent. The corners, however, are still soft. Stop down to f4 for some more clarity there, but it's only at f5.6 and f8 that we begin to see sharp corners. So overall, the lens is clearly happier at home on a full frame camera, although APS-C shooters can at least enjoy some very good sharpness in the middle of the image. Okay, let's take a look at this lens's distortion and vignetting now on a full frame camera. The lens projects a slight barrel distortion here, and the image corners are looking dark but not disturbingly so. Stop down to f1.4 for a bit more brightness overall, and at f2 and f2.8, any vignetting left is pretty much gone. So yeah, a good performance here. This lens can focus down to 1 meter, a bit further than average, so it won't be mistaken for a macro lens. Chinese lenses with ultra bright apertures often suffer the same weakness, poor image quality close up, and this one is no exception, as you can see. Stop down to f1.4, f2, f2.8 and finally f4 for good improvements that finally lead to excellent close-up image quality. Now let's see how well the lens works against bright lights. Houston, we have a problem. At f1.25 there's simply a huge amount of flaring, whether those bright lights are directly in or on the edge of the image. Stop down to f2, as I do here, to see it greatly reduced, although bright lights on the edge of the frame still cause some sudden and serious problems. Okay, let's look at this lens's bokeh. Deeply out of focus backgrounds look absolutely fine to me here. When they are less deeply out of focus, you can catch a bit of jumbliness here though, but nothing too serious. And finally, because of the terrible close-up image quality, my usual longitudinal chromatic aberration test just isn't going to work here until we stop down to about f2 or f2.8 that is, where we can see almost no colour fringing on bokeh highlights. Overall then, well, for £500 and particularly for $500 US, I'd say this extremely bright aperture portrait lens is worth a punt. It has impressive build quality, looking absolutely incredible on your camera. When it comes to optics, it can deliver very acceptable and even dramatic results even at its brightest apertures, and top it down for some excellent sharpness, particularly on a full frame camera. Just don't try to shoot anything close up with it, okay? And remember, manually focusing a monster like this will take a bit of practice. For the price you're paying here, the TTArtisan 90mm f1.25 does come recommended, but do bear in mind its limitations. I still can't get over how tough and awesome this thing looks. It's like the Arnold Schwarzenegger of Chinese camera lenses. If you want me to carry on being the king, or at least Prince Regent, of testing camera lenses, then check out my Patreon page in the description below. There, supporters receive all kinds of bonus content that I love putting together just for you. Ciao for now.